So I know we don't always talk about tabloidy stuff here on the show because it's a bit of flash in the pan. You know, by the time these episodes get out, it's kind of old news. But I know we have both followed the career of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson over the years, and he had a bad day recently. And
he's had a bad period recently.
Yeah. So he, he's on a bit of a dip in his career. You know, he made a big play to be the head of DC, basically the Shadow King, talking a big game about this Black Adam movie that he made. When was it? Was that 2022 release?
Something like that. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he would talk a big game on all of his social media profiles in the months leading up, or the years leading up to that movie coming out. And, he swore that the Black Adam was going to be he was going to change the hierarchy of power in the DC universe or something bombastic like that. And then, the movie comes out, and we've both seen it by this point, and it's not horrible, but it's also nothing special when it comes to superhero movies. And, it severely underperformed at the box office, and it kind of indicated that DC was due for, what is it they say in the industry now? A creative reset. It's not a reboot.
It's a euphemism for we screwed up really, really bad. Please give us another chance.
Exactly. So, he had apparently, there was all this behind the scenes drama too. Like he had made this pitch that like $7 Productions, his company, would shepherd the future of the DC universe in the movies. And Black Adam would be this character who would recur across all these different releases. And, he lobbied really hard to bring in Henry Cavill as Superman for the cameo in Black Adam, and et cetera, et cetera. And then Black Adam underperforms, and suddenly he's out on a limb. And of course, this was when David Zaslav was being appointed as CEO of Warner Discovery, and Zaslav had a whole, we've talked about him before on the show, much covered.
Yeah, he's a douche.
Yeah, he's made some bad choices, very anti-creative kind of things, very pro-business, but, he's whatever. And so he appoints James Gunn and Peter Safran as the new kind of kings of the DC stable, and Dwayne Johnson spirals down into going back to appearing in the WWE and, kind of going back to his roots. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure he's perfectly entertaining as a wrestler, but and then this tabloidy story comes out about how he's considered like this super unprofessional person on all of the sets of the movies that he's been on over the past few years, and he's chronically late to the tune of like 7 or 8 hours to set, and he's costing Amazon $250 million, or he ran up the budget of this Christmas movie that's supposed to come out to $250 million, which seems like a lot for, a fun Christmas release.
It seems like a lot. It is a lot. A Christmas movie?
Yeah.
Christ, they probably made Santa Claus for like 20 million.
Exactly. So, and considering that it's an Amazon release and it's not going to have a huge theatrical rollout, it's going to be hard for Amazon to recoup much of that money. And yeah, apparently like this guy, he just loves to, pull a power move on people and show up super late to set because he knows that they can't do much without him. And,
you forgot the best part about peeing in water bottles
and
making someone else toss it for him. That's gross. But how big-headed and how big of an ego do you need to have to pull this kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah.
And when the big feud between him and Vin Diesel happened in Fast and Furious, I definitely was more like, I think The Rock's like probably the more professional one because Vin Diesel's done so many movies. He's probably thinks he's the star of the series, and he is. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we all owe Vin Diesel a huge apology.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way too. I mean, I don't know how I kind of sided with The Rock when that was happening, but
well, because he was again. I can't remember he's the people's hero. Isn't that what he used to call himself?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like at the height of his popularity. Vin Diesel seemed like he was just trying to like squeeze as much out of the Fast franchise as he could.
Yeah. And so, it turns out that, maybe The Rock was the aggressor in that situation. And apparently he also, he got some bad blood going between himself and Ryan Reynolds on the set of the Netflix movie Red Notice, because, again, showing up late, costing a bunch of overages. I've been on like teeny tiny like student film sets, and nobody likes it when they've got like a collaborator on something like that who is, showing up even a couple hours late. Nobody wants to sit around and just twiddle their thumbs when, you got better things to do. So when you expand it to something of that scale, I mean, it's just insane, right?
It's wholly unprofessional. And considering where Vin Diesel came from and where Ryan Reynolds came from, like, I totally believe they are professionals. But The Rock, something happened where I think maybe it just got to his head a little bit. Surrounded by yes people, surrounded by his little personal assistant who's like always egging him on or cheering him on.
Yeah, this Hiram Garcia character who he's made a producer at the $7 company, and yeah, I mean it's a classic. I don't know which publication had the scoop, but it read as like one of these classic tell-all type stories, right? And
never say never, but it does feel like his blockbuster film career is done. Like no one's going to work with him after this.
I mean, I think he might go into like actor jail for a couple of years, but
he's probably getting paid a lot for WWE.
He is, yeah. And I mean, he gets,
and I think a lot of people appreciate him returning to WWE. So maybe he'll try his power play there because Vince McMahon is out.
Yeah, it might work for him on that one. I mean, he obviously he makes plenty of money with like sponsored posts on his social media. I mean, I've seen quotes of like, he makes like $2 million if he mentions a particular brand in a single post something. So he won't be hurting for money no matter what he does. But yeah, it's his kind of squeaky clean image that, working with Disney and everything is taking a beating, and it's, ultimately it doesn't amount to a whole lot, but it's kind of funny. So yeah, that was just the one little bit of tabloidy stuff that I wanted to indulge in before we get started here today, because we got some serious stuff to talk about here, and why don't we get into it?
Welcome to the Extra Buttery Podcast. It's a show about movies, TV, anything with a story and actors on a screen, really. Join Jason Chan and Robert Snow's free-flowing conversation with deep dives into characters and plot with the occasional salty opinion. So get your popcorn, I got mine right here. Let's start the show!
Welcome back to the Extra Buttery Podcast, episode 125. My name is Robert Snow in Toronto, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jason Chen in Vancouver.
Hello.
And this time on the show, we have Civil War up first, the Alex Garland near-future dystopia fable that definitely had me thinking when I came out of the theater. I'm curious.
Interesting you call it a fable.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that. And then kind of related, but definitely turned up to 11 is Fallout, the new Amazon Prime show that I've been eagerly looking forward to as a fan of the games. And I got Jason to watch at least 5 or 6 episodes, so curious to know what he thinks about that. Then I will indulge in a little bit of a mini rant about Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, from Zack Snyder.
We appreciate your sacrifice.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, I could devote
save it.
I could devote a whole hour to that, I'm telling you. But anyway, and then we'll touch in on The Fall Guy, the new Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt action comedy that just opened this weekend. And if we have time, we might get into Shogun on FX as well as X-Men 97. So stay tuned for those. But Civil War, this is one that I didn't know it was coming out until the trailer just popped up in front of me one day online.
We're moving to DC today. You need to go down there.
They shoot journalists on sight in the Capitol. Every instinct in me says this is death. Bloody.
But I've always liked Alex Garland's stuff.
Same.
He's been a screenwriter starting back in his early career, and then he got into directing with Ex Machina, which is a movie that caught me totally by surprise. I love that movie. I think it's it's a great example of like small scale sci-fi, great performances, great writing. Then Annihilation, which he made sort of in partnership with Netflix, as the sort of on the tail end of Netflix's partnerships with like indie filmmakers. Then he came out with Men, which is a very different sort of movie, more horror influenced, body horror, Cronenbergian kind of stuff. And now he's back with a movie that is more grounded in reality than Annihilation, Ex Machina, or Men, but it still has an element of exaggeration to it, I would say, but it's so frightening, so harrowing, and so plausible that I think, people should really, even if the war scenes are a little bit much for them, it's worth a watch just to kind of like see kind of, even if it's only like half true or half accurate to what would really happen in a actual modern day American Civil War. It's worth it just to kind of like see it play out. How did you feel when like the credits were rolling and you were like getting up from your seat? Did it hit you in like an emotional spot, or were you?
No, I was like, that's it. That was my reaction.
Oh, it was like, because you had texted me before you went to see it, and you were a little concerned that it was going to be too intense.
I heard it was intense, and I watched the movie, and I was like, "Where's the intensity?" It wasn't
okay. So you were kind of, maybe you were a little blunted to it because like you were expecting more, and then
because so I was really like looking forward to this movie, but I was a little hesitant because I was like, this feels a little too realistic to me. And I've watched a lot of war films, and this was described to me as a war film. Mm-hmm. So I was expecting like pretty heavy stuff, and maybe I am, desensitized a little bit, but I didn't find it particularly grabbing. I thought the premise was a nice idea, but I didn't think he really went full bore into the idea. It feels half-baked. I definitely thought Annihilation and Ex Machina had more things to say and delve deeper into something, because Civil War is a very dense topic. There's clearly a lot of things that goes on in these type of movies that have a lot to say. I just didn't feel like he said a lot.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're more, you're kind of in agreement with a lot of the American critics that I was reading takes from on like Letterboxd. Because I noticed there was a bit of a divide between like...
There was a huge divide. I was surprised, yeah.
Because there was a lot... Once the trailer dropped for this, there was a lot of buildup. People were like, oh, I see what he's doing here. Like he's kind of like... It's a cautionary tale of sorts about what America could fall into if it's not careful. And then I kind of expected, like, given his skills as a writer-director, if it was a good movie, there'd be a lot of like... really visceral reaction from Americans because they live there. But I noticed that like the American critics were feeling like he was often being accused, Alex Garland was being accused of being too apolitical or pulling his punches or not having enough to say, which you kind of found. Whereas when I was reading takes from like Canadian critics or British critics, they got hit a little harder and they felt like it was a little bit more powerful and moving. And then that kind of led me to the theory that like maybe it's, if you're an American and you're seeing this sort of a kind of apocalyptic vision of what might happen to your own country, it kind of it's almost like when a doctor watches like a medical drama, like you're personally invested in it, all the ways in which this would or wouldn't happen, so it's harder to kind of immerse yourself in it or something because you're so like it's happening in your backyard, essentially. That was kind of the vibe I got, but I don't know if it was the same for you. It was just something that I was kind of like picking apart when I was reading different takes.
Not really. I just felt there were a lot of vignettes. I thought this movie could have gone in a lot of directions, and it touches on a lot of them, but it never commits to one single idea. And I think maybe because if he had committed politically either way, that it would have been too controversial. And I don't think that's what he's going for. I don't think he's going for a controversial movie here. I actually think that given sort of the cautionary tales, the sort of ideas he wants to discuss, I feel like sci-fi is a way better vehicle for that. Because you don't have to touch on real life people or political events.
Right. Because, in this movie, you're following a foursome of journalists who are trying to get to Washington, D.C. The Civil War has been taking place for a number of months or even years by the point the movie starts. And huge parts of the United States are just completely laid to waste. Cities are bombed out, roads are impassable in most cases, and there's atrocities happening on both sides. But the different states that have seceded, so like Texas, California, Florida, a bunch of others, they're all closing in on DC, and we're given the specter of this president played by Nick Offerman in just a few scenes. It's not a big role. He's kind of cast as he's not specifically a Trump-like figure, but he's definitely someone who is on the Republican side of the spectrum, who has embraced some of the policies that
Is he though?
I mean, we don't know. We don't hear him.
I fight against that idea because the idea is that he is clearly a president who is unfit for office and had clearly broken some of the rules of the American Constitution.
Yes. Yeah.
But we don't exactly know where he aligns politically.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I mean, we don't hear the specific policies, and so maybe the thing that seems the most Republican about him is his distrust of the press. So he's basically allowed his soldiers to shoot journalists on sight, and so we immediately as viewers we kind of affiliate that with the Republican way of thinking. But you're right. I mean, there's in some future world, there's no saying that a Democratic president might not also be hostile to the press. So
because they did mention an Antifa massacre, right? So wouldn't that imply that the Democrats did that, or a left-leaning group?
Well, yeah, it's very ambiguous, isn't it? Because that could be that could be a situation where Antifa, the organization such that it is, committed the massacre, or the massacre was done on members of Antifa. So and that's kind of where I think a lot of the American critics felt like he was pulling his punches or being too apolitical, because by not kind of drawing those lines, he was kind of fence sitting basically. And that was
a little bit.
And I didn't feel personally that the fence sitting was all that bad, because for me it was more, I kind of enjoyed the abstractness in the sense of the journalists would have to do this job no matter which side of the political spectrum was involved. So they had this job to do. They were being targeted by getting closer and closer to the Capitol. And then the question is for them, how do they document this and how do they deal with the emotions that come along with being in the line of fire, seeing your country ripped apart, knowing what to shoot and what not to shoot, that kind of thing.
It kind of touches on my point, is that I feel like this movie was mismarketed.
Yeah.
It's totally a movie about photojournalists and journalists in conflict.
Right.
And I mean, I think Kirsten Dunst is a really incredible actress. She's, I think, grown so much since the Spider-Man stuff.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah.
Spider-Man, I feel was a blip in her career, because she did stuff that was far more interesting earlier, and now she's become a really wonderful dramatic actress. But I had problems connecting with some of the characters. I thought she spoke to me the most. The driver, I can't remember his name right now off the top of my head.
The actor Wagner Moura,
Joel. Okay, so he spoke to me the least. Sammy did not speak to me at all. Poor Thufir. He just can't survive any movie at all. I thought Kaylee Spaney was good, and I feel like she was the only one that really had an arc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's kind of the audience proxy too. Like,
yeah, exactly. But again, she plays the role of the dumb audience proxy, which I really hate. Like, there's supposed to be a high level of intelligence in this film that I didn't get. And I think that ultimately that was the most disappointing part, thematically and character-wise.
So you would have wanted to see Kaylee Spaney's character have a bit more experience under her belt before we meet her, and then she's not quite as like frozen by the things she's seeing.
No, I think she's great. Like, she's first this really inexperienced, naive photographer to becoming the next Lee Smith.
Right.
Becoming the person who becomes so numb to all this that she just does her job. Like, she takes the photos as she should be. Lee Smith is the one that we find out later is like this person who has undergone an enormous amount of PTSD and is actually just burying a lot of her feelings and all that kind of stuff. Joel, to me, as a veteran, I guess, writer, he's never
he's like a reporter writer. Yeah, he's not so much a photographer.
His role or his character was always a little nebulous to me. Like, for a guy who always seems to be in control or wanted to be in control, he has zero control. He's actually like a functioning alcoholic in a certain sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, with him, I agree with you. Like, Kirsten Dunst's character is a little bit better drawn, but his character, you know, whereas Kirsten Dunst's character Lee is, she's more stoic, and she kind of like, she buries those the PTSD or the emotions down and just kind of maintains this kind of like stoic front, whereas Joel is like more outwardly like he gets like excited, he gets like a rush from being in the line of fire, and but that's just as much of like a coping mechanism as Lee's stoicism. So like he's rooting and hollering and doing dangerous stuff and like drinking to kind of like forget, but then ultimately when they're both confronted with horrible stuff that they see, or they're both held at gunpoint, they both fall apart, you know. So, and
also the last scene, and spoiler alert here, where he asks the president if he has any last words, and he says that phrase, doesn't that feel like gotcha journalism to you? Like, what a horrible reporter.
I guess, yeah. I mean, like he stops the soldiers from killing him at first,
which I thought was like a great moment, and I was expecting something really, really poignant. And instead he's kind of like, haha, I got the quote that I want, that I will be remembered forever. But if you think about it, it has very little substance. And it maybe because it has very little substance, because we never know the sort of aspirations the president has, or like the history surrounding what precipitated the Civil War.
So do you think, on the whole, the movie would have been better if we had a little bit more grounding in what came before? Like,
a little bit. I think it would have been better if he hadn't titled the movie Civil War.
Okay.
This is much more about journalists in combat, and being able to see things in a very amoral and objective lens, rather than a movie about two sides or multiple sides in a conflict.
Yeah.
Because we never really hear what all the other sort of factions in this war are fighting for or against. You know, like, you definitely get the people who want to stay out of it. You definitely get the people who are off the rails, like the Jesse Plemons character, who I thought was fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
You get the soldiers who are just simply surviving at the farmhouse.
Yes.
You get the refugee camps. And then you get these sort of like hillbillies who are trying to make a quick buck, take advantage of the situation, kind of
yeah,
thing.
Yeah.
So it has all the elements there. I just wish, like in Ex Machina or like in Annihilation, he really doubles down on what he's trying to say.
That's fair. I mean, I will say that I do enjoy Ex Machina and Annihilation better as movies. This one, I still had a very visceral reaction to, though. Like, I remember my heart was beating pretty fast. And
really? See, I felt the opposite, because maybe I had hyped myself to that level.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen, though. I mean, like, for me, it was the scenes where like they're witnessing the basically war crimes, like the Western Forces soldiers. It was that montage where they're like going into what looks like a university campus, and they're like putting black bags over the heads of the American soldiers and then like just shooting them because they don't care. Or the moments when like the assault on the White House and the closing scene, like, none of these characters have very much plot armor, any of them could die. So which is great. I was feeling like I was involved. I was, I was worried for them in a sense. And some of the stuff that you were witnessing, some of the violence was enough that you were like, wow, okay. I mean, it's definitely true that like he could have gone further. He could have shown even more violence and more gore, more on the level of like a Saving Private Ryan or something. But yeah, I don't know.
Maybe not more violence, but like I feel like the ideological ideas he touched on, he could have went a little more extreme.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, it was violent enough. Let me just put it out there. It was violent enough. You figured that at least one of the three core people would die. Like Sammy dying was a no-brainer. Like, come on. The mentor always dies.
It would have been a bit of a cheat if they had, talked in that opening scene when they're in the hotel and they're talking about how dangerous the journey is. If they had made it the whole way through and no one had either been like injured or killed, then it would feel like that was kind of misplaced, like hype essentially,
or just improbable. Like in any war movie, someone has to die. Like the group doesn't stay intact. It never does.
Right.
Like it's part of the loss of that you feel in war movies is that a really important and often a very nice character dies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Joel to me was played. Wagner Moura, I thought did a fine job. He just felt like a bit of a budget Pedro Pascal to me. But I thought Kaylee Spaney was fantastic. She's always good. I've been a big fan for a while, and I thought she was really good. But I do think their performances carried a lot of the movie, even though we don't dive into a lot of stuff as much as I would have liked.
That's fair.
Especially Garland, for a guy who has a reputation for being like really like extreme, in certain regards, with his ideas and like pushing things to the limit. I was just a little taken aback about how guarded he was in this movie.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I think I will eventually rewatch it just to see, knowing how people have reacted to it will change. It's impossible for it not to influence your next viewing. So I'd be curious to kind of like rewatch it, knowing where everyone ends up, not having that same investment in figuring out what happens and see how that changes, what I think about it.
One question I had for you was the scene where they're driving down the highway and Joel meets his two buddies driving in the car next to them.
Yes.
How did you feel about that scene? I felt that scene was supposed to break up sort of the monotony and sort of the dread, and you're supposed to have a little fun. But that scene really annoyed me.
Oh, really?
I felt that scene would have worked without them, even in the Jesse Plemons farmhouse scene.
It didn't annoy me, but I did see it. I could kind of see where Garland was going with it, because I read that. I was like, okay, we've got two characters who are kind of like, they're having a lot of fun. The two friends, they're just zooming along. They're not really plugged into the danger of where they are.
Which feels odd to me.
And because they're kind of like, they're even more cavalier than Joel's character is.
They're pressed though.
They're pressed, but they're kind of like the action junkies, the adrenaline junkies that you sometimes come across in these situations where like it's a life or death situation, but their way of coping with it is to be really over the top and crazy and jokey because they don't want to, so then they're kind of like acting out and, fooling around. And then in the way I was reading that scene, I was like, okay, what Garland is doing here is he's going to set these guys up as being like devil may care. They're going to take their eyes off the ball for a second. And now that's going to make them mess up and they're going to get in trouble. And I could almost like, I knew the Jesse Plemons scene was coming up because we hadn't seen it yet. And I knew I'd seen it in the trailer and everything. And I was like, this feels like the time when like the Jesse Plemons guys will show up and they'll like take advantage of how their guard is down. And then when you know it, that's exactly what happened. So it was kind of like the movie was telegraphing a little bit to me.
It just felt out of character. You like Joel being, you know, sort of taking or participating in the joyride tells me that he's not a real pro. It makes his partnership with Lee even more surprising to me. I know you kind of need a foil, but they just didn't seem like a good match in the first place. And of course, Jesse, Kaylee Spaney's character, sort of getting caught up in this just shows her naive sort of attitudes towards the whole thing. But I just felt like it was a setup to have Jesse Plemons be more menacing and shock you a little bit with all the things that happen with the shooting and like the sort of the trauma that you're supposed to be like. There's a part, like maybe like I don't know what to call it, but I just felt like they kind of deserved it.
Well, I think,
like,
I mean, yeah.
In a time of civil war and you're a professional journalist, like how could you be so careless and cavalier?
Yeah.
It didn't really make sense to me.
I think, yeah, it's a bit, it's kind of like a functional kind of thing where, you know, we don't have that many characters we can lose. There's only 4 main characters.
Yeah.
So they kind of, you know, they had to sort of engineer a situation where there would be more characters who would take a bullet.
Yeah.
And then
very
even if we, you know, literally, you have expendable characters who we don't know very well, but who can help hammer home the lethality of Jesse Plemons' character. So, yeah.
I did notice you had a much higher rating on Letterboxd than I did, but for different reasons. I thought it was a fine movie. I think the acting and the cinematography and the directing carried the movie more than the message did.
Yeah, I think that's what I really connected with. I was really drawn into that aspect of it, and then maybe the message of it is lacking a little bit, or it doesn't work for everybody. But yeah. I would have a hard time recommending it to everyone, though, because I feel like it's the kind of movie that, even though it does have some thrills in it, it's not like enjoyable thrills. It's a little harrowing. It's a little spooky. And it's the kind of thing that like politics junkies or news junkies would get more out of than like your average moviegoer, I think.
I guess, but I feel like they would also be more prone to leaving the theater disappointed because it doesn't.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, right? It doesn't go as deep as they think it should. But anyway.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, then moving along to another dystopian universe, one with a little bit more dark comedy, Fallout.
What you're doing is insane.
I don't set the world.
It isn't like the vault out there. It's big.
I just want to start.
I've had a rough week. Practically every person I've met up here has tried to kill me.
I'm simply going to harvest your organs.
You need to go home. You come from a world of rules, of laws. You should not be alone.
Adaptation for Amazon Prime of the video game series, which is now, 5 or 6 games and a whole bunch of other connected bits of media, and something that you hadn't really played a whole lot of before this came out. I've played Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4, and one of the tabletop like card games. So I'm pretty familiar with it. I've probably logged like 300 hours of gameplay.
That's crazy. I like RPGs. Just like I really have to dedicate a lot of time to it.
Yeah,
I've always heard good things. I was looking forward to this show because video game adaptations always kind of interest me. And
sure,
I had plenty of friends who played it who always rave about Fallout, including you. So
yeah, and so like this was one that we are in a bit of like an interesting time with video game adaptations, where for the longest time it felt like TV and movie screenwriters and directors didn't really get how to make these things work, and there was a long history of like really bad things that came out of these adaptations. But then starting with like, I mean, a little bit with the Sonic movies, then with The Last of Us, and now this, it feels like we've got a few more.
You mean Warcraft wasn't good?
And I mean, yeah, that's an example actually of like, you obviously, as a showrunner or a director, you need to have passion for the source material. And I don't think Duncan Jones with Warcraft, I don't think he lacked passion. Like he was clearly a fan of that franchise and he knew it very well. But yeah, it just goes to show that like, there's so much that goes into making a good adaptation. And I would say that the Fallout adaptation, I mean, speaking as a fan of the games, granted, I haven't played the really old ones before Bethesda became the publisher and developer. But as a fan of the series, this was a very satisfying watch for me. They struck a good balance of like Easter eggs that appeal to fans without having it be too in your face. Very faithful to the look and the tone, the incorporating the dark comedy, but also, having the gore and the some of the creepier elements. So it must have been a tricky balance to strike, and I applaud them for that. There are a few aspects like narratively where there's some conveniences, there's some kind of things
I was
that
mention that, yes.
Yeah, there's some situations where like you're like, oh, okay, from a story level that doesn't make the most sense, or it feels a little bit janky, but still, I mean, considering the number of ways this could have played out, I think it's still very, very solid.
So tonally, is the video game similar to the TV show?
Very much so. Yeah. Like that sense of like, you have this quirky retro futurist world where the kind of like technology and culture has kind of hit the 1950s and stopped. And then it progresses, and they have aspects of like advanced technology, like cold fusion and nuclear powered cars and things like that. But then the nuclear apocalypse happens, and the countries throw a bunch of bombs at each other. And this is in the universe of the show and the games. It's 2077 is the year the bombs drop, and so that the various groups of like the rich and connected end up in these vaults underground, and several hundred years pass, and so the people who were still on the surface, most of them died, like 95% of the population died, but a few dogged survivors clung on, and civilization sort of continued in a very beleaguered way. And then the vault dwellers start clambering out of their vaults, and they believe that they are supposed to restore the world to some better future, but they quickly discover that they were probably lied to when they were locked in the vaults, or when their ancestors were locked in the vaults.
Classic.
And maybe they were the science experiments, and the real humans, the people who are the ones who are really going to carry forward the ideals of the human race. They've been on the surface this whole time and dealing with way worse stuff. So, yeah. And then you have all these like jokey bits of like, you'll see something really violent, but someone will be really chipper about it. There's this constant juxtaposition no matter where you go.
Walton Goggins is the best at that, eh?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Was he the thing that really drew you to it?
I love all his stuff. He plays very similar characters in all his movies, and I get a huge kick out of someone who finds sadism funny. I don't know what that says about me, but I just think he's a
I mean, you're in good company, because like the anyone who's a fan of the games certainly has that sort of taste for dark humor, because the ghoul in this, he's a former he's a character who's invented for the show. We've never had a character like that in the games. Who is a
Is Ella Purnell's character invented for the?
All of these are like brand new characters.
Okay,
so
that's what makes it so good, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, like that is so in the sense, it's almost like you're getting a new video game to explore, and each video game in the series has new characters as well, because they never carry anyone forward, and it's all about, because it's an RPG, it's about. The games encourage you to kind of develop your character over time and choose different skills and perks to change the way you play the game. And you make different moral decisions that influence the types of quests that you go on. So the game is very moldable in that way. And so I think that when they were coming up with the show, they kind of had to do this, where they had to come up with like fresh characters who we would learn about as the episodes unfolded. So yeah, we have the Ghoul. He's a former TV actor or movie actor who, at some point, he experienced a bit of like a career meltdown, and we meet him in the very opening scene of the show doing like a birthday party. So that like he's had a bit of a fall from grace, but he's doing this birthday party when the bombs fall on Los Angeles, and you get this astonishing sequence of him like riding his trained horse like away from the bombs, and then like there's this big flash forward. We catch up with the new bunch of characters, but because he was exposed to so much radiation, he's become he's been living on the surface for 200 years, and he's been totally rotted away, and he's this like zombie, essentially this like intelligent zombie who's kind of taken on a bit of like a gunslinger character and bounty hunter.
Yeah, he's a bounty hunter. Yeah. So the best compliment I can probably give this show is that it makes me want to play the video game.
Yeah.
By the way, does Ella Purnell remind you a bit of like a younger Helena Bonham Carter?
I haven't really thought about it before, but I can see the physical resemblance.
Oh, really? There's like a little similarity there. There's a bit of like not unhinged, but there's definitely a bit of like an unpredictability, a little bit of zaniness to her character that I really like.
Yeah. And so she plays a character named Lucy, who is a vault dweller. So somebody whose family has been living in the vaults for 200 years. And all she knows, anyone that she knows has known for 200 years is life inside this fallout shelter and this kind of utopian society. So she gets this rude awakening when she's forced to go out on the surface and look for her dad, who has been kidnapped. She realizes that everything she's been told about life on the surface is very different, and what she's been told about the ideals of the vault society is also not true. So she ends up she's the closest that you get to like the player character from the games, where you in every Fallout game you play as a new person who's emerging from a vault, and you experience the world and you kind of learn about it and you explore and stuff like that. So it makes sense to have Ella Purnell's character be like an innocent, basically, who then gets slightly corrupted the more time goes by, and she's forced to make increasingly nasty decisions, like cutting off a guy's head, or you
could say she was corrupted in the vault to begin with,
I guess. Yeah, I mean, like
and coming out of the vault gives her I guess makes her less corrupt because she's more in tune with like the surroundings and what's actually going on.
Yeah, but she's a survivor. She's adapting to, if she kept up this kind of aw shucks, leave it to Beaver kind of attitude, she would be killed pretty quickly.
Yeah. I haven't finished the series yet, but I will. It's really interesting. I like the layered mysteries, and I love all like the whole like time capsule sort of feel to it. Kind of like on a tangent, but one of my favorite comedies growing up was called Blast from the Past. You ever seen that? With Brendan Fraser.
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
So it's Brendan Fraser and Alicia Silverstone, and Brendan Fraser is the son of this like conspiracy theorist, and his dad builds a nuclear shelter because he thought nuclear war is coming. Turns out nuclear war never happens, and he comes out and he's kind of like a fish out of water, and he's trying to catch up on what happens, learning about society and everything. And obviously this is like a darker, much darker and different version of that. But I really liked it. One issue I had is that, are all the Knights of the Brotherhood, or is it just Maximus really that dumb? Maximus is a very frustrating character.
He's a little frustrating, yeah. So the Brotherhood of Steel is like this group of they're zealots. They're like religious zealots, and they're obsessed with the technology from before the bombs fell. And they have this kind of like pseudo medieval kind of hierarchy, and they fly around in like old helicopter type ships, and they wear big suits of mechanized power armor, and they try to impose their will on the wasteland. I would say that, like, as a player of the games, you can definitely choose to help out the Brotherhood on various quests within the games, but they're never portrayed as being particularly morally upstanding or like worth cheering on. You know, it's just as fun to side against them as it is to ally with them. Yeah, and they never strike you as being like very enlightened, despite how like they're technically capable. They have access to a lot of like resources and fancy weaponry and stuff like that, but they never strike you as being like, oh, they're worth rooting for, or so it makes sense that like Maximus is depicted as being a guy who like he's always got this kind of like sour look on his face, and he's trying to like
I don't know what he's trying to be or go for.
Yeah.
First he wants to be a knight, and then he becomes a knight, and then he lies about it just out of survival instincts, and then he realizes there are other comforts that he's more interested in, and I just don't really get what drives him, you know?
I mean, in a sense, like you could say that like he's living out one style of like playing the game, right? Because if you're a player character in a game, you could choose to like go all in and just support the Brotherhood no matter what, even though you're aware of like some of the things they do that are like not all that good. And
nobody in that show does anything purely good.
No, exactly. So then like,
which is great, which I love that.
He's stumbling through this existence, you know, trying to stay alive as best he can, and lying and kind of deceiving people, and you know, but he's a bit of a window into that survival instinct that Lucy needs, right? So like she learns.
I guess there's just not a lot going up here, you know, for Maximus. Like when you watch him think and make decisions, it's like I can see the gears slowly grinding, and then it just stops. You know, with Ella, it's always turning. It's always turning.
Yes.
And then
I'm curious to see what you think when you finish the show, because that definitely that carries through, and then they obviously they want to leave it on a bit of a cliffhanger because they've been confirmed for a second season.
Yeah, which is great.
So they will you know, you'll see where Maximus ends up and kind of like arrive at an idea maybe of what he's planning. I don't know.
Okay. So I don't know if you've ever seen Justified, but Walton Goggins is incredible.
I watched the first season of Justified. So that was where I first came across Walton Goggins. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, yeah, this guy's got something. Like he's got something that no other actor has. And
you know what's weird though? I found my favorite character and the one I connected with the most so far is Norm.
Oh, yeah.
Lucy's brother. For some weird reason, I feel like he's the most intelligent, rational character on the show.
Yeah, and Norm is an interesting guy because he, you know, they normally when you're playing the game, you don't spend a whole lot of time in a vault afterwards, but you do go back into other vaults that you come across in the Wasteland, and you learn about all of the screwed up stuff that happened in each one, because almost all of them had like some specific science experiment that was being conducted on the inhabitants. And so Norm's storyline in the show is kind of allowing us to learn about, you know, the things that make Vault 33 so messed up. And he allows us to kind of explore that angle of the Fallout universe without having Lucy be the one to do it, because she's kind of occupied elsewhere.
Right.
You know, so they're kind of like multitasking a little bit by having Norm there. But yeah, he's you know.
And I know some people find Johnny Pemberton really annoying, but I think he's hilarious.
He's well suited to this, and I kind of
he really fits in with that like humor aesthetic.
Yeah, and I think you will, again, when you finish it, you will see like how they plan to use him in the future. And yeah.
All right, I'm totally hooked. There's a lot, like, it definitely starts off slow. So like narratively, it's kind of interesting because you see everything through Ella's lens, and then gradually you get introduced into this Fallout world where there's like different layers of like conspiracies, and that's what gets me going. At certain points, it does get a little hard to follow sometimes. And I do feel like they just leave little breadcrumbs, but also sometimes not enough for me to keep watching. So like the relationship between vaults 33, 32, and 31 slowly unravels, and maybe that's why I like Norm the most, because that's part of the show that I'm like really interested in, and which they went into more.
I will say that like they definitely tie everything off there. I mean, like there's definitely a resolution.
Okay,
you may find that it's resolved with a little bit too much of an exposition dump. So I'll warn you about that. But I mean, at least you do get answers to everything, and they don't leave you kind of hanging or with like kind of unsatisfactory answers there. Yeah, like I was mentioning before, you know, you do have characters meeting up a little too conveniently. You know, the Wasteland is a big place. Los Angeles is a big place. And somehow, you know, there's a few contrived kind of scenarios where the characters run into each other again and again because they need the drama to happen. And yeah, that may not work super well for everyone, but, you know, I think it's coming from a game where like you can literally fast travel to different locations, and the character that you just spoke with in one town is waiting for you in another town. So, you know, it's you can kind of hand wave it a little bit if you need to.
Okay. All right. I want to hear your rant on Rebel Moon Part 2.
Let's go give her herself. Are you truly prepared to allow this to continue in your name?
I'm sorry. I won't allow this place to die for me.
Yeah. So I will say that like I don't often get angry at movies.
I don't think I've ever seen you angry or like annoyed or pissed off.
Well, that's flattering. I guess I'm a relatively optimistic person, and I tend to grade things pretty highly, even when it's something that deserves a bit more of a critique. But this, I mean, I had no qualms about dunking on this thing. I was spitting tacks. I was so mad when I watched this. I just felt like, you know, we devoted a plenty of time to Rebel Moon Part 1 when it came out in December, and we both agreed it was one of the worst things that we watched last year.
The worst.
And then I remember like cautiously defending certain aspects of it because they were like, you know, there were things about visually. Yeah. I mean, and that's obviously, we know Zack Snyder is like, you know, that is his one strong suit. And there were things about like the kind of weird blending of like medieval stuff with sci-fi stuff that kind of caught my eye. It was like, ooh, shiny. That's kind of cool to look at. And that's ultimately all that it's good for. Because he comes back with this after, you know, we just talked about some breadcrumbs in Fallout. Like there are breadcrumbs in the first one to do with like this princess character who has like the ability to restore life to things. Or there's this evil character who, you know, is put forward as being the ultimate bad guy. And that, you know, there's got to be a showdown between him and the main character played by Sofia Boutella because he's her adoptive father, and et cetera, et cetera. This movie, Part 2, you would think, you know, we were sold on this being a two-parter, you know, and then Snyder does a rug pull and he basically says, no, you don't get any kind of resolution on any of this stuff. I want to make 4 more of these movies. I want Netflix to fund this whole expansive thing that I've made. And so everything that, you know, you thought of, any of the cliffhangers that you might have been interested in at the end of the last film do not get delivered upon here. He is withholding from you. And I don't know, maybe there's some promise of like these director's cuts that he's going to release on the platform, R-rated director's cuts that are like, you know, plenty of nudity and sex and profanity and violence, and these movies are already fairly violent, but, you know, he's like, oh, that's my vision, you know? And I'm like, there's no amount of violence or nudity or sex that could fix any of this stuff because both movies are just narratively empty. I've never encountered characters that are so one-dimensional and so borrowed from other, like just piecemeal from other bits of media. There's literally a scene in Rebel Moon Part 2 where the characters who, you know, they've been fighting alongside each other in a few battles by this point, and they're getting ready for this big battle with not the ultimate bad guy, but the same bad guy as last time, who was conveniently brought back to life. And they're like, oh, we don't really know very much about each other. So then, I kid you not, a 10 to 15 minute sequence is devoted to them monologuing about how they became radicalized and became rebels against this evil empire. And none of the stories that they tell are remotely interesting. In fact, they just leave you with more questions. I had so many technical and like lore related questions when this movie was done. So many just basic logical questions that I devoted a whole post on the website to this, because I felt like if I kept those questions in my head, I would go nuts. I'm aghast. And ultimately, it just makes you feel like, Zack Snyder is not really interested in anybody else watching these movies. He's happy to spend...
Except himself.
Yeah, he's happy to spend hundreds of millions of other people's money to, basically play like little action figure-y games in his basement. That's the experience of watching this movie. He knows the lore inside and out, but he's not going to tell you about it. And he's certainly not going to, make you care about any of the characters. He's just going to paint these little characters and smash them together and have his little, stories in his head. And you're meanwhile being like, why should I care about any of this? It's amazing. And I just, it's already in the running for the worst thing I've seen this year, and it's only May. So,
so you're saying there's some hope for this movie still? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, man, if it takes him 4 movies on top of this, or director's cuts or whatever, to make us care about these things, I mean, Netflix would have to be like the most irresponsible with money of any production company to
worse than Amazon with The Rock.
I mean, I just can't believe it. Like if they greenlight any more sequels for this, they deserve to be acquired by some bigger company. Like I can't believe it. It is just the most like insular, navel gazing kind of filmmaking. Not to mention, like, you can't even really enjoy any of the visuals anymore, because like he's shooting everything on these like vintage lenses, and it's all like, everything looks kind of out of focus. And so yeah, I haven't heard a whole lot about this movie since it came out, and I imagine like, it's just going to fall away. And yeah. Do not waste your time. Don't even try to watch this as like a so bad it's good kind of a situation, because it doesn't meet that bar at all.
I was gonna say, like, kudos to you for even giving this movie a chance, because there's no way I would have.
Yeah, and I mean, I got that vibe when we talked about the first one too, where the for you, like, I remember you weren't quite as interested in like the medieval Roman kind of production design stuff, or the some of the stuff to do with the villain or whatever. So like those were the last few little scraps that I was just like, okay, well, I've devoted 2 hours. What was the first one? Was it 2 hours and 20 minutes?
Yeah, it was long.
So I felt like this sense of like, okay, I'm going through hell. I just have to keep going. I have to make these 2 hours worth it. And I guess the only solution to that was watch another 2 hours worth of garbage. And then you ultimately feel like the rug has been pulled from you, because he's saying like, oh no, this isn't it. There's still more. And I'm like, I'm out.
Brevity is not Zack Snyder's strong suit.
No. And I mean, obviously in his Justice League situation, he obviously improved on that by having this like free reign, blank canvas situation to just shape it exactly how he wanted it. But at least there he was constrained by certain things to do with the characters being superheroes and supervillains that we were familiar with, and stories from the comics that we might be familiar with. But here the reins are completely off, and it just proves that, I think he needs some kind of structure around him if he's going to get anything worth watching out of it.
Yeah, he needs someone to I guess keep him in check, like prevent him from being his own worst enemy, basically.
the Tarek guy from the first one. You remember he had this extended slow-mo scene where
is he the Beast Rider guy?
The Beast Rider guy.
Okay.
So in this one, they're like, okay, we got to know what Tarek's deal is. So he sits down at this table the night before the battle and he tells his story, and you see his home planet. And Zack Snyder's like, wouldn't it be cool if Tarek came from a planet that was like this like Victorian megalopolis on steroids, and like all of the buildings are like these big like, Gothic skyscrapers, and they all wear like, you know, weirdly Victorian outfits, and you know they but they still ride on those hippogriff like griffin characters.
Yeah,
they ride on that despite, you know, having this kind of 19th century society or whatever. And he's not bare chested at all in any of the flashback scenes. So I'm like, why is he bare chested now? Why does he dress like Conan the Barbarian? But that's the problem. It's like a microcosm of what's wrong with these movies. Zack Snyder's like, don't think about it. It's just, let's have him live on this planet with all these buildings and these airships and stuff and blah, 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 because it just looks cool when you smash stuff together. And I'm like, no, it doesn't look cool. You need rules. you need to explain things. You need to have something to hold on to. Otherwise it's just formless mashup, remix stuff that has no grounding or any kind of like weight to it.
I'm not surprised by any of this. We gotta accept that the Snyder Cut for Justice League was like just a blip on the radar. That was like the outlier.
Yeah.
I mean, I still enjoy Watchmen though, like the extended.
Yeah, but again, like Watchmen, he was basically like he was making like a moving version of the comic, and like he was doing a panel for panel recreation of the comic.
Yeah,
so
fair
like,
enough, yeah.
Yeah, he was on rails there, and I think that's he would do well to go back to doing that.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
All right. So should we talk about the Fall Guy?
You've been a ghost. No phone call, no text.
It's not like I didn't want to apologize.
You don't have to explain anything. It was just a flame. So how have you been? God, I hate that thumbs up stuff guy stuff.
Okay, so before you start, I haven't seen this, and I'm a little shocked to hear you say that it's quite good. Like this, to me, it feels very much like Jungle Cruise, which is the Emily Blunt rock vehicle, where it's just like dumb fun. But dumb fun doesn't get me to the theater anymore.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, this is definitely dumb fun. But I would say that I haven't seen Jungle Cruise because it felt like...
Oh, don't watch it. It's horrible. Well, not horrible, but it's not good. Yeah.
You know, Disney was basically just like, you know, recreating one of their theme park rides. And they were like, oh, if you've been to Disney World and been to this ride, you'll like this movie. But...
well, Pirates was great. So... Yeah,
that was a flash in the pan, though, because the subsequent ones were not good.
I mean, fair enough. Yeah.
They get steadily worse with every season. The second one was all right. But anyway, so this is still dumb fun, but I guess it lives and dies based on how you feel about Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, because they do have great chemistry here. Okay. They are very believable as a couple who, you know, Ryan Gosling plays a stuntman who is working at a pretty high tier in Hollywood. He is the stunt double for this fictional actor played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, this self-obsessed, pig-headed guy who is too scared to do any stunts, and so he has Ryan Gosling's character do them all for him. Ryan Gosling's character experiences this accident in the opening scene of the movie, and he's on ice for like 18 months, and he feels this like sense of failure around this, you know, like the thing that made him so good, you know, he messed up, and so he cuts off all of the relationships in his life. He breaks off his romance with the Emily Blunt character, she was a camera operator at the time they were together, and then she's now 18 months later, she's got her first big gig as a director, and he is told by the producer of the film that she has asked for him specifically to come down to Australia and be a stunt man for this production. And so that kind of like wakes him up, and he's like, oh, wow, she's still into me. Mm-hmm. And so he gets to Australia and then gets drawn into this caper involving the disappearance of Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. You know, he's absent from set and he needs to be tracked down. Otherwise, the studio is going to shut down the production, and they're going to, and Emily Blunt's character will probably not get another directing gig in the future. So Gosling's character is invested. He wants Emily Blunt's character to reunite with him. He wants her to do well in her career. He doesn't want to be responsible for messing up her career prospects. So, you know, his motivation makes a lot of sense. And obviously she doesn't trust him very well because, you know, despite what the producer said to get him down to Australia, it turns out she didn't want him there at all. And, you know, she's hesitant about having him around because she thinks that, like, he's bad news, he's not worth trusting, et cetera, et cetera. And so this movie is directed by David Leitch, who we know from movies like Bullet Train and the John Wick franchise, Atomic Blonde. He's a former stuntman, stunt choreographer, got into directing. And, you know, this is almost the perfect movie for him because other people have said that too. Like, you know, to have a story about stuntmen and a behind the scenes story about Hollywood makes sense for a guy who has worked his way up through that pipeline to tell that story. And I mean, I like Ryan Gosling. I think he's a very funny actor when he's given the right material. He's perfect for this. His chemistry with Emily Blunt is really solid. I would say that, like, it has a bit of the vignette kind of issue that we were talking about earlier, where, like, individual scenes work really well on their own and they don't stitch together super well. Like, you sometimes feel like you could swap them around and you might get a better flow to them. But the ultimate experience is just, like, you know, there's plenty of jokes. There's really convincing action. You know, they're doing a lot of this stuff for real. Ryan Gosling did a lot of the stunts for real. And it doesn't feel like cut to death. So yeah, it's a fun time. I mean, it's not very smart, but
well, Ryan Gosling gives me the sense that he's not playing a very smart character anyway.
No, I mean,
like, the premise of the movie is pretty simple, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then, like, you know, it's through his investigation. I mean, he's not a detective, so he's not going to go about tracking down this actor in the most, like, rigorous kind of way. And some of the stuff to do with, like, Aaron Taylor Johnson's character and how involved he's become in this, like, criminal kind of enterprise doesn't make the most sense. It kind of, like, you know, sometimes you're like, oh, would he really go that far to do X, Y, and Z? You know, would he really be in that deep? You know, it doesn't really hold itself together on that front. But, you know, it's more of a setup to get Ryan Gosling into wacky scenarios so that he's, like, being dragged down the street of Sydney on the back of this, like, careening dumpster, and while he's getting into a fight with a mercenary, and you know, he's telling the dog that he's traveling with to, like, go bite a guy's balls and stuff like that. And Emily Blunt gives it pretty good too. I mean, she's no damsel in distress, so she gets a few good fight scenes of her own.
Okay, all right. I don't know if I'm gonna watch this because it feels like one of those movies that I'd rather watch on streaming.
I mean, yeah, it would work fine on streaming. I don't think I saw it in IMAX just because it was the screening time.
Oh, I didn't even know it had an IMAX version.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't shot in IMAX, so it's kind of like a up conversion situation. But so there's nothing about it that's, like, made for IMAX. But it works good on the big screen. It would work fine on the small screen too. So yeah, it's uncomplicated, but it's still fun. Do you want to sneak in a quick word about either Shogun or X-Men 97?
Sure. Okay, so I'll go real quick because you haven't seen either of these shows, right?
No, but I of the two of them, I'm most interested in Shogun.
Yeah, I figured Shogun would be more in your wheelhouse, considering you just went to Japan. So
exactly,
kind of nice. So Shogun, been based on that book. It's been remade a bunch of times. But I do think this version is great because Hiroyuki Sanada is fantastic.
I love Hiroyuki Sanada.
Anna Sawai is actually, like, a revelation in this TV show as well. It's getting a lot of hype. I do think it's deserved. I do not think it is one of the best TV shows ever. I do think in that sense it's been overhyped.
Well, it's become a very zeitgeisty show. Like it's the show that most people are watching right now.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that because it introduces people to Japan, and it's a lot of it's like a lot of the things that they show and like a lot of the culture that they show is quite accurate. So it's not like you're getting, Beverly Hills Ninja,
Right.
All the scenes involving the Japanese characters are in Japanese, so it's subtitled heavily. I do have a problem with one of the main characters, the white POV character whose name escapes me right now. I'm just gonna look it up real quick. John Blackthorne. Yeah, John Blackthorne. So he's played by Cosmo Jarvis. He has such a commanding presence that it almost takes away from the rest of the show, because I do feel like the rest of the show is much better.
How does he compare? Because the rough sketch of the story bears some similarity to The Last Samurai, the Tom Cruise movie, in the sense that there's a white former soldier who washes up in Japan roughly in the same time period, who ends up getting kind of introduced to Japanese culture and kind of drawn into politics.
So there's definitely similarities there. The big difference is that Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai is a central character, whereas John Blackthorne to me is very much a POV character. Like he doesn't have an active role in how the politics of the country plays out. Okay. He certainly plays an important role because he becomes sort of like a chess piece in the political sort of game that they play. But by no means is he ever considered like a warrior.
Okay.
like Tom Cruise was. But I speaking, you brought me up on The Last Samurai, which is one of my favorite movies growing up, is that The Last Samurai doesn't actually refer to Tom Cruise though, right? So
no, it refers to the Ken Watanabe character, doesn't it?
And like the whole samurai
clan,
like system itself. Yes. So I always thought that was a bit of a misconception or something like that. But I do recommend it. We should talk about it when you're done. I do find, because it can be a bit of a talky sort of drama, I find it hard to get through sometimes, like in one sitting. I don't think it's very bingeable. Although I do find myself saving the last 2 episodes as a sort of like feature length movie I can watch.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, I am definitely interested in catching up on it. I think it seems to have come out at like almost the perfect time, because you keep hearing stories about how more and more familiar North American audiences are with watching things with subtitles. So
thank God, about time you guys came around, not you, but
yeah, I know. I've never had a problem with it, but yeah, like you hear people say all the time where like, oh, I'll watch like English language stuff with subtitles just because I prefer it that way. And so like used to be that people would say, no, I can't stand subtitles. I don't want to have to do all that reading while also trying to follow the action. So that's less of a problem now. And it means that shows that are in other languages, can kind of get a better footing, and that's a really good thing. I've seen Anna Sawai in only one other thing, and that's the Godzilla show on Apple TV Plus.
I've heard that's really good.
I'm liking it so far. I'm like 4 or 5 episodes into that, and I think you would probably like it better than the recent MonsterVerse movies at the very least.
I hate those things. Did you watch Godzilla vs. Kong?
Versus Kong, and then also Godzilla X Kong, the newest one, which is the second best performing movie of the year so far. So I know it hurts you a little bit to hear that, but they're definitely making a sequel, because that has outperformed the expectations that the industry had for it. So people love giant smash 'em up movies with Godzilla being like this big rubber doll. I know you don't like it, but
yeah, I don't mind Godzilla smashing things. It's just, it's clearly not the same as the Japanese Godzilla films with the political messages and what's not.
I know we're trying to wrap things up, but I mean, a quick word about that movie. As much as I enjoyed some of the fight sequences in it, it's definitely not the best of the franchise. It's on the lower end of the MonsterVerse tier, because they're all on the lower end. But I mean, you think about like this scale of Godzilla 2014, and how imposing Godzilla looks in that movie, because you get a sense of just how huge he is in comparison to everything else. And but this movie throws all that out the window to its detriment, because it basically says, like, the human characters are so inconsequential. Let's just have all the fight scenes be big monster versus big monster, and they start to feel more like regular sized, as a result.
I mean, that should have been the point anyway. I didn't understand all the need for the human stuff in the
well, you'd be surprised though. You'd be surprised. You actually do need them there, because you need to see the fights from their perspective, because the characters like Godzilla and his
like visually, yes. I just didn't care for their plot.
Oh no, I mean, and Godzilla -1 proves that you really should have characters that you care about. It works a lot better when you do that, and you have great action. So anyway,
okay. So final word: X-Men '97, 5 out of 5, top tier. One of the best things Marvel has ever put out.
And that's not just nostalgia talking. Like it's
not nostalgia. Like, yes, part of it is nostalgia. But like the plot, the drama, the writing, all really top tier. Like, I always think that the next episode can't be better than the previous one, but it somehow tops itself. And it deals with a lot of political mature issues that we were missing from the previous version of the cartoon or from the movies. I highly recommend it.
The more of the humans versus mutants stuff, and like the
the politics and everything. Yes, I do highly recommend it. It is one of the best Marvel TV shows out there. It is up there with WandaVision and Loki season 2.
Interesting. Okay.
And I do think you should watch it. Very, very bingeable, and really compelling stuff. It would help if you knew about X-Men lore, because it would help you understand some things that were going on, but you don't need to. It's not a prerequisite.
Right. Do you think this is Marvel's way of kind of, just on a purely like business standpoint, do you think this is their way of kind of getting us warmed up for the introduction of the X-Men into the MCU live action?
I mean, that's part of it, but it doesn't have anything to do with the MCU movies.
Okay.
Like, it has no bearing. It doesn't even reference it whatsoever.
Right.
There's certain lines that it might reference, but more so the cartoon, not the movies.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, give it a shot. I think, especially the most recent episodes where Magneto goes ham. It's incredible TV. Like, if it was ever made into a live action series, which I hope one day it might be, and they just copied the line in the show frame for frame and shot for shot, line for line, it would be equivalent, in my opinion, to like an HBO show. It's that adult and serious.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
consider me intrigued.
Yeah. Definitely tonally more geared towards adults than the original cartoon. The original cartoon was definitely had some kid stuff in it, but it was a lot more serious than, say, like Spider-Man, or even that would be the closest thing, I guess, Spider-Man, because it kind of came out at the same time. They're both Marvel.
Yeah. What an interesting time we live in, where like, there's so much diversity of stuff on like streaming apps now, where they can can make a whole dedicated animated show in the style of a Saturday morning cartoons show from the 90s, but have it be more adult in its themes, and still have it be a hit and like find its audience and all of that.
If you think about the kids who were in 97, we're adults now.
Yeah.
Right? So this stuff speaks to us. Like, it's like we grew up with them.
Yeah.
And so you get the double hit of the nostalgia, and touches on a lot of themes that we see a lot in real life today. And even in the original X-Men comics, they were very much adult comics in some ways, because of the themes that they talk about. But
okay, final question. What do you think a kid who had never heard of the X-Men at all would think upon watching this show?
I think they'd be interested, but it's definitely not kidsy. This is definitely more, even the original X-Men cartoon, I feel like was more geared towards like teenagers and older kids.
Yeah.
Not young kids. I also felt like when we were kids, the stuff we watched was more adult. Like the Batman the Animated Series was a show for kids, but it was dark.
That was pretty dark, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the Dark Crystal
Yeah.
was freaking dark. The Never Ending Story was terrifying and dark. And I don't know. I look at the kids these days and they're watching like Bluey or Blue's Clues, and I'm like, what the heck?
I mean, I don't want to get into another whole thing, but like I've had multiple people now who are parents try to sell me on watching Bluey.
Oh my god, my cousins have young kids now, and they're watching Bluey, and I'm like,
and then they say like, oh, you can enjoy Bluey even if you don't have kids. You should just watch it all. And I'm like, I
can't.
I understand the argument. I understand how it's framed and how there can be stuff in it for adults and kids, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I'm very skeptical. I'm not gonna buy into it.
I've seen clips. I'm like, this is a well-produced children's show. I see the appeal for kids, but I myself, no thanks. I have way better stuff that I want to watch.
All right. Well, with that, brings this episode to an end. So thank you all for listening. We are on the precipice of summer movie season, such that it is.
Can't wait.
There's many things lying ahead of us in the coming months. I'm very excited for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
It's not Matt Reeves, though. It's not Matt Reeves.
I know. I've heard some initial buzz that maybe the test screenings went over kind of poorly, so I don't know what to make of that. But we do have George Miller back in theaters with Furiosa. I'm feeling a little more confident about that.
I've heard mixed things.
So there's some open questions in the air, but yeah, lots to talk about in the coming episodes. So get excited for that. But until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
The Extra Buttery podcast is written, recorded, and produced by Jason Chen and Robert Snow. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to rate and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. And remember, popcorn is always better with extra butter.